welcome to all of you. You may have heard that recently there was a vote at the EU Parliament which may be of influence to the denomination of alt dairy products. I'm stating deliberately it may be of influence because there's no end game yet. In this short session, I'll tell you all about it. But I'll first briefly introduce myself. My name is Karin Verzijden. I'm a lawyer, a food lawyer that is, and I operate from Amsterdam. We work internationally with companies active in the life sciences, being medicinal products companies, medef companies, and companies active in the field of innovative foods. We help them with regulatory advice, which also covers the labeling and advertising of food products. We negotiate a dozen and loads of other commercial contracts, and we litigate where need may be. We also write an informative blog, which is called Food Health Legal, which you may check out for yourself. So what has been happening in Brussels lately? Actually, the European Commission is preparing a financial framework of the so-called Common Agricultural Policy for the upcoming 8 years. In this framework, a total amount of 365 billion euros will be attributed, so this needs to be done most efficiently, obviously. In this context, the European Commission published 3 legislative proposals, and the one potentially affecting alt dairy products is just one of them. This proposal was voted in the Parliament on 23 October last, and one of the amendments that was accepted is Amendment 171. What does this imply? Well, potentially further restrictions on alt dairy denominations. I say further restrictions because since the decision of the European Court of Justice in the case called Tofu Town, there were some restrictions already. This case related to products like vegetarian cheese and tofu butter. It played in Germany actually, and the court then decided that it was no longer allowed to refer to use actually dairy names because these are highly regulated for alt dairy products. What are the further amendments introduced by this particular 171? It will be prohibited in future to make any direct use of dairy names for alt dairy products where such use is exploiting the reputation of typical dairy names. Now, what does that mean? In my view, this is pretty subjective, not so easy to establish, so this will only trigger litigation. Secondly, it will no longer be possible to say that your product is yogurt style or an imitation of butter or a substitute for another dairy product, because this will be prohibited. It will also be prohibited to cause any misleading regarding the true nature of your product. This is nothing new actually, because this is already laid down in the Food Information to Consumers Regulation. As I mentioned, I think this amendment is not entirely clear, and also it seems to contradict with the farm to fork strategy that clearly advocates further use of plant-based products since they contribute to a more healthy diet, and they may also help in preventing the zoonosis we've seen today. It's not the end game yet, as I mentioned, because first we need to see the so-called trilogue discussions between the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the representatives of the member states. It's not entirely clear when these discussions will be held, but you can imagine the lobby is on. What is the main challenge in this perspective is that the changes affecting the alt dairy industry are just one of many. So for lobby groups like the Good Food Institute, it is difficult to catch the attention of the representatives of Parliament, of the Commission, and of the member state representatives to point out to them that this is really important to the sector. So what is the current status quo? I would call it Tofu Town Plus, meaning that you should know what this decision implies. No use of dairy name for alt dairy product as such, but more importantly, check out the food information to consumers regulation. The key, a norm laid down therein is that you should make sure to prevent any misleading on the true nature of your products. This was also recognized by a recent decision of the Dutch Supreme Court in a case in which Alpro, at that time not a Danone company yet, was litigating against the Dutch dairy industry. What the Supreme Court also recognized there is that it's not only about the prevention of misleading, but also about preventing unfair competition. And I dare to say that if you tick these two boxes, so you're not at misleading your consumers on the true nature of your product, you're not after unfair competition of the old dairy industry, it will be a hard case to make for enforcement authorities and your competitor to say that you are acting in violation of the labeling rules. However, if Amendment 171 becomes a reality, true scrutiny should be applied to alt dairy product denominations. I would like to terminate on a positive note how you could potentially deal with it. I call it Yogurtgate, and it related to a Dutch company, Kinney Abbott, that received a complaint from the Dutch and the Belgian dairy lobby stating that they are no longer allowed to use the name yogurt for their plant-based product. Now, instead of being sad or mad, Kinney Abbott replied with a massive publicity campaign in a rather playful way. You can see it here. They actually thanked the dairy industry for flipping their perspective. That implies that the alt dairy industry becomes the new normal. Now, this is a very particular example relating to this specific case, but let me give you two other tips. If you try to do some cutting edge advertising regulatory wise, the advantage part should be your website rather than your product logo. The rationale is that it is far easier to change information on your website than it is on your product labeling, especially if the product is already out and about. Finally, please note that the term dairy is not a protected designation under the agricultural standards regulation. So personally, I think that the use of alt dairy for the indication of your product is perfectly defendable. Thank you for your attention, and do let me know if you need any help in this space.